All right. So today we're talking about energy and how to level up our energy in a way that we can do that with our lifestyle. So this was kind of a fun presentation to put together because it's a lot of the same information you've heard from me before if you've come to any of my other topics before, but kind of for a different reason and put together in a different way. So today's agenda is we're going to talk about the physiological process of creating energy, how our body creates energy and how we can support that process with what we eat and how we eat. So the majority of class is going to be focused on food, but also kind of reintroducing that process of true physiological energy and how do we create it. And then we'll talk about the psychological energy and fatigue factor as well, because it's not just about creating energy in the system. We also have to truly feel energetic, which sometimes they don't always overlap. So I'm going to tell you to put your backpacks on and get yourself in the school bus and buckle up, because we're going to drive on back to junior high and high school, where we learned about the basics of human biology and the whole process of energy making. So hopefully we all remember some things that are called organelles. Hopefully you remember something called ATP, or even, dare I say, oxidative phosphorylation. Does anybody remember any of this stuff? Do you remember the word mitochondria?
No.
Okay, we've got some notes, but I'm going to go through that a little bit. So basic human biology, and hold on, I'm letting some people into the waiting room over here, is that we do truly create energy in our bodies, and then we burn that energy and we use that energy. So we are no different than plants in that way. Remember the whole energy system? You remember that picture where there was a sun and it came down to the plant, and the plant used the energy and created its own food and then it went out into the atmosphere? We do a very similar process in our own body. So it's kind of important to know this background information when we're talking about eating and lifestyle for energy, because I think it can feel really woo-woo of like, what do you mean energy? I feel energized or I feel tired, but we're truly creating energy, which is ATP. ATP is our source of energy in our body, our energetic molecule that we use. And the mitochondria is the part of our cell that creates it. So we have a cell, and inside of every single cell there is, right? We have millions upon trillions upon billions of cells in our body. Every single cell has what is called an organelle, which is like a cell within a cell, if you will. And that mitochondria organelle is where our ATP, or our energy, is truly created. So a lot of times you might hear that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's because it's the energy factory within our cells. So your mitochondria has a couple of different jobs. It helps with cellular signaling, so cell communication. It is a big part of oxidative stress, so AKA immune system. It's helping to get rid of inflammation and help the immune system to fight inflammation. But its main job is nutrient metabolism for energy production. So your mitochondria takes all the broken down particles from the food that you ate, puts it through this whole factory system, and spits out ATP, which is our version of energy. And when we have a good amount of ATP, we feel energized. And when all of our cells are functioning correctly and our mitochondria are really strong and healthy, we have all these energy producing factories in our cells. We feel good. We have energy to burn. And if then we are burning the energy, we're being active, we're talking, we're using our brains, then we go through this process all over again, where our body is being told, oh, we need more energy because we just burned it, and we're going through this cycle. So we really want to focus on a healthy mitochondria. If your mitochondria isn't working well, and it's not like you have one mitochondria, right? You have a mitochondria inside every single cell in your body. So there are tons of them. But if they are dysfunctional, if you have a majority of mitochondria that aren't working quite right, the factory is slowing down or backed up or understaffed, it depends on where the mitochondria is, but you're going to start to feel symptoms. So if a lot of the mitochondria in your brain are not working well, that's where we get Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, various types of neurological degeneration, because we're not creating energy in the brain. If the mitochondria in the pancreas and the liver are not functioning right, that's where we get into diabetes and insulin resistance, because we are not creating and using energy correctly in these areas that regulate our blood sugar. If our mitochondria in our fat cells, our adipose cells, are not working well, we're going to have, this is where people will like, why do I have obesity and overweight when I'm doing everything right? It might be that your mitochondria aren't working well, and metabolic syndrome. If the mitochondria in your adrenal glands are dysfunctional, that's where we get hormone imbalances. And all of these things are going to lead to feelings of fatigue, feelings of lack of energy, of brain fog, because these are major areas of your body that your body is now having to fight against, and that takes energy. So we want healthy mitochondria so that we don't have symptoms that need to be fought against, so that we can use our energy correctly and produce it at really high volumes. Okay, so our goal in this part of class, in talking about the physiological energy, is how can we eat or not eat? What do we eat or not eat to support a mitochondria that is strong, a really well-oiled machine factory, but also an environment so that mitochondria can use that energy and tell the body how to use that energy well. So I know that's like really a Cliff's Notes version of science, but that is when I'm talking about what to eat and what not to eat, I'm constantly thinking about mitochondrial health. How are we supporting that? So what does mitochondrial health mean? What do they need to be healthy? And these are the four main areas that can impact the mitochondrial function. Blood sugar and insulin. If you have dysregulated blood sugar, and if your insulin is really high all the time, you will have a fatigued mitochondria. Mitochondria will start to get really tired because it is having to fight against this really kind of clogged system of too much sugar and too much insulin. So essentially, you should be, when you're doing any tracking, your fasting glucose in the morning should be less than 100 if you track it. If you have a glucose monitor, if you're picking your finger, if you have a lab 2 or 3 times a year, your fasting glucose should be below 100. If it is not, then there's something going on where you probably have too much sugar in the system, and that's going to cause your mitochondria to be tired. You are probably feeling fatigued at that point. BG is blood glucose. So you're also, if you happen to be someone who tracks this is hard to know unless you're tracking, but if you wear a glucose monitor or something like that, your glucose should go back to baseline within an hour of eating. So let's say it started off at 90 before you had a meal, and it spiked up to 115 or 120 after you ate. Within an hour, you should be getting close to 90 again. And your triglycerides should be less than 150, because triglycerides are a sugar and fat molecule put together. So if those are really high and elevated, it shows your body's trying its best to store extra sugars. So all of these are good indicators. Because the thing with fatigue is that if you're feeling kind of tired all the time, your body adjusts. Our bodies are really good at just making ourselves feel good and normal. So you may not even notice that over time, over the past 2 or 3 years, you're feeling a lot more fatigued than you used to. You're not as energized. But these are really good markers to lean on to know, maybe something's going on and maybe I'm not as energized as I thought I was. Okay. Another great area to support the microbiome is your mitochondria is the gut microbiome. So when your bacteria in your gut are unhappy, and if you have a lot more pathogens than you do the beneficial bacteria, that's going to communicate to your mitochondria that it needs to work extra hard. Dysbiosis, or a microbiome that has like too much of the bad guys, is also going to create digestive issues. And when we have problems with digestion, we're not absorbing our nutrients correctly. So your mitochondria might not even be getting the nutrients it needs to create ATP. Body composition is incredibly important for mitochondria. So what does this mean? It means, what is your body made up of? Not just how much do you weigh, but of what you weigh, how much is fat tissue? Of that fat tissue, how much is visceral? Of your lean body mass, how much is muscle? These are really important things to know about your body composition, because you might be at a healthy weight, but you might have excess visceral fat. And if that visceral fat is blocking the pathway of your mitochondria from sending out ATP, you're going to feel tired. You're going to feel sluggish. So the way to know this is to get on a body composition scale. They sell these for homes now. They're a little bit pricey, but you could also come somewhere like the wellness center that has an in-body machine and just stand on it and it'll give you a printout. You could also get a DEXA scan. And then detoxification is the other piece of mitochondrial health, because if we're not detoxing correctly, then just like blood sugar, our blood and all of our liquid areas are getting clogged up by cells and junk that don't work very well. And so your mitochondria is going to have a harder time pushing out ATP. Also, mitochondria turn over just like every other cell in the body. That's a very normal process of being a human. Is as cells start to get older, they start to almost recycle themselves into smaller, newer, healthier cells. And that's part of detoxification, is getting rid of the old gunky cells and bringing in new ones. And if that system isn't working correctly, you're going to have some kind of old, gunky, not functioning well mitochondria that's not pushing out the right amount of ATP, and you're not going to feel good. So these 4 areas, as I start going through the nutrition recommendations, this is what I'm thinking of. Because it's hard sometimes to parse it out. There's a lot of the same recommendations are good for improving blood sugar as for improving body composition. So rather than going through each of these 4 and saying what to do in each one, I'm just going to go over general recommendations total and know that they all target these 4 areas. Okay. So what do we want to maximize? What do we want to eat a lot more of to help with our mitochondrial health? We have 3 areas of energy. Okay, 3 macronutrients, if you've heard that term. If a nutrient is a macronutrient, it means it's a nutrient that gives our body what it needs to create ATP. Okay, so your macros are your carbs, your proteins, and your fats. Those are macros. Versus things like vitamin C and magnesium and vitamin D. These are micronutrients. They're very good for us and they help our pathways, but they don't give the mitochondria what it needs to create ATP. They kind of help with using the ATP later on. So first, we want to focus on how do we give that mitochondria what it needs to create energy. We need to focus on our macros, but we want to make sure we choose the right macros. So we have carbs, protein, and fat. All of these give us energy in different ways. In the carb category, we want to focus on the carbohydrates that have lots of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory nutrients. Antioxidants are your colorful foods. So we want carbs that are colorful. We want carbs that are in their most natural state and less processed. So this is going to mean high fiber, lots of color, lots of produce, lots of plant foods. So your goals within the carb category are 25 grams of fiber every single day, minimum. You can have 55 grams of fiber every day if you want to. That would be even better, but 25 grams minimum. What this fiber does, it slows down digestion so that we're not getting a huge spike in our blood sugar. It also helps feeling full. And so it tells all of our hormones that we're feeling pretty good. We don't need to eat as much. It also helps to feed the good, healthy bacteria. So we're checking off that blood sugar checklist, the gut microbiome checklist. The fiber also helps to make sure we are detoxing correctly within the gut. So we're hitting that detox checklist. So 25 grams of fiber hits all of those areas. 5 cups of produce a day is what it takes to get 25 grams of fiber, but the produce is really special versus just grains, because sometimes people will include bread and rice and pasta in that grams of fiber. I want specifically 5 cups of produce, fruits and vegetables, because that's where we're getting the color and the antioxidants, because antioxidants help make sure that the structure of your mitochondria is intact. And then we want to focus on a couple of different categories of foods. Again, if you've heard me teach, you've heard me say these words before: bitters, alliums, and crucifers. Bitters are literally what it sounds like. Any food that is bitter. So think radicchio and kale and radishes and bitter melon even. What would be another good bitter food? Radish. Endive is another good one. The more bitter, the more antioxidants it has. Alliums are any of your root bulbs. So garlic, shallot, onion, fennel, these are all types of alliums. And these have a really special type of antioxidant that specifically directly helps the mitochondria. And crucifers, this is anything with a big leafy green. So that's your kale, broccoli, cauliflower. It can be the leafy greens around it. These have a special kind of antioxidant called sulforaphane, which helps with the detox process. And then fermented foods every single day, you don't need a lot, just like some pickles or some kefir or some sauerkraut, a little bit of yogurt. You need a couple tablespoons every day to help make sure that gut bacteria is very healthy. Okay, so I have a chart here that shows you different amounts of fiber per food so that we can start working toward that. Protein foods. So protein foods they give the least amount of energy. Your true energy comes from carbs and fats. But what protein does is it builds all the structure of our tissue and our cells. And so without a good amount of protein, you're not building a good amount of mitochondria. Your mitochondria become very weak. Also, on the flip side, and we'll talk about exercise later on, but if we're exercising really well to get energy and we're not eating enough protein, then we're breaking down our muscle without building it. We're going to feel weak and we're going to feel tired. So protein is very important for both this physiological process of energy, but also our psychological. So how much do you need? 1 gram per pound of lean body mass every single day. It's a lot more than people think. If you don't know how much lean body mass you have, it's another reason to get a body composition analysis on one of those scales. It'll show you your lean body mass. For most people, this is going to be somewhere in the 100 to 120 grams per day range, which means you have to be getting at least 30 grams of protein in every single meal, and most people are not. Okay, which usually means we're replacing protein with processed carbohydrates to meet our calories. Healthy fats. So fats is our other source of main energy. When you think of energy sources, carbs and fats are both sources of energy, but they do it a little bit differently. So carbs give you immediate energy. Fats give you long-term energy. So think of building a fire. You have the logs and you have the kindling. The kindling gives you that immediate source of fire. That's your carbohydrate. The logs, those slow burning logs, give you fire over time. That's your fat. So they're both very, very important. It depends on what kind of energy you're needing. That's why when we're feeling really sluggish, especially in the afternoons, is when we start to get cravings for sweet things, because our body's telling us you need a quick source of energy, and that's going to be your carbohydrate. So ideally, we get a little bit of both. It's really important that our bodies know how to use carbs and fats for energy. That's called metabolic flexibility. That means that your mitochondria doesn't have to think so much about where is my energy source coming from. It's just going to create ATP, whether there's fat nearby or whether there's carbs nearby. So it's important that we know how to use both, which means that sometimes we aren't eating as much carbohydrate and sometimes we aren't eating as much fat. So it's important to kind of fluctuate and not have both a high carb and a high fat diet. So to get a healthy source of fat, we'll go back over that protein in a second. Healthy sources of fats are fatty fish, ideally 3 servings of 4 to 6 ounce portions of fatty fish every week. Most people are not getting that much. I have trouble eating that much, in which case we want to get a supplement of omega-3s because that's how important this type of fat is to the cellular function of a mitochondria and to feeling good and energized. Whole food fats. So olives, avocados, nuts, and seeds, as opposed to the oils of these things, are even better because they have fiber. So now they're counting for both categories. And if you are going to use an oil, a cold pressed oil, so that we get antioxidants. Okay, so those are our 3 main sources of energy. Just because I forgot about this image down here, this shows you also serving sizes of protein and how much is in each serving size. So you can kind of start to get an idea. If you're only having 2 eggs at breakfast with 2 pieces of toast, you're only getting 13 grams of protein, which is not anywhere near that 30 gram range. So we want to be looking at how we can get more protein there. The other important thing with mitochondrial health and what to maximize is hydration. Our cells will plump up when they're hydrated and they will start to shrivel like raisins when they're not. And so if they're not plumped up, there's no way that all those nutrients from all that healthy food you just ate from carbs, fats, and proteins, those can't get into a cell if the cell is shriveled up like a raisin. So it's really important to hydrate to let your cells do what they should do to create energy. It's also important for the fluid motion of our bloodstream. So if we're dehydrated, our blood isn't moving as quickly as it should, and it's not able to bring that energy up to the brain to say, hey, I'm energized. So a lot of times, especially in the afternoons when we're feeling sluggish, I'll tell people, have a nice ice cold glass of water, maybe with some lemons and limes or citrus in it. That often is enough to give us a tiny boost of energy. Now, is it enough to be energized, all afternoon? Probably not. We need to focus on other things, but it can give us that little bit of energetic. motion. Now, we do need to minimize certain things. And wouldn't you know, the things we need to minimize are the same things I teach about for gut health, for blood sugar health, for heart health. Everything in our body, for the most part, uses the same things and doesn't need the same things. So what we want to minimize is added sugar. When we have too much added sugar, we have too much glucose and insulin resistance. And again, that is one of the main pieces of mitochondrial health. Too much sugar will also impact the microbiome as well. So our maximums, this is not like fiber where we have a minimum, it's the maximum of 6 to 9 teaspoons per day of added sugar. That equals 24 to 36 grams if you're looking at labels. The lower end of that is for ladies. The upper end of that is for guys. Okay, so we do have different levels specifically, usually for the most part because of body type and body size. So 6 teaspoons or 24 grams maximum every single day for ladies, and 9 or 36 for men. So if we're looking at this yogurt picture over here on the right, it says per serving of a 2/3 cup of this yogurt has 16 grams of added sugar. Okay, so if I divide that by 4, that's going to give me my teaspoons. 16 divided by 4 is 4. There's 4 teaspoons of just sugar. Think of having a little 2/3 cup of yogurt and taking 4 teaspoons of white sugar and pouring it in there. That is a heavy amount of added sugar for a very small portion of food. If instead, could we buy plain yogurt, take 1 teaspoon of a low glycemic sweetener like honey, add that in and stir it up? It would still taste sweet. It would still taste yummy. We are cutting that added sugar by a 1/4 and therefore no longer close to our maximum for the day after just a little cup of yogurt. The other thing I want to caution you on is sweetened beverages, because liquids are absorbed so very quickly that they give us this really intense energy spike really quickly when we have a sugary drink like soda or Gatorade or juice, but it is immediately, the body wants to get rid of that really quickly because it's too much, the levels are too high, so it gets sucked up into our fat cells usually as triglycerides, and then we have that dip. So that's why when you have a soda or a juice or something, you feel great and energized for like maybe 20 minutes. And then suddenly you want more again and you're feeling kind of sluggish again. It's because you're having this spike and a huge dip because the body doesn't want that sugar in the system. So there are processes in place to get rid of it, but then you feel the repercussions of that. We also want to minimize oxidized fats. That's basically industrialized oils. These are oils that are put into highly processed foods. The reason for this is they bring with them inflammatory substances that then the body has to work to get rid of. So now our mitochondria is producing energy to get rid of the inflammation from this fat we just ate instead of producing energy to actually feel energized, if that makes sense. So factory farmed animals, highly processed foods, fats like canola oil and safflower oil, these are all oils that bring with them inflammation. Same thing with ultra processed foods. A can of bean is not an ultra processed food. Okay, processed is different than ultra processed. Processed means some of the cooking or the preparing was done for you, the chopping. Ultra processed is AKA Frankenfoods, foods that we have no idea how it came to be, what is sold to you in that box. We don't know what the ingredients are. We don't know what was done with those ingredients to make it look like that shape that it's in. Ultra processed foods are unrecognizable to their original form and often have synthetic foods in them. The reason these are so bad for us is because, again, they bring with them inflammation. And so now our body has to produce energy to fight the inflammation instead of giving us energy to feel good. And we want to minimize alcohol. I know this is a touchy subject, especially because Mediterranean diet says have wine and it's good for us. Alcohol is a toxin. Believe it or not, like it or not, it definitely is. And all the research on energy and on longevity show that if you have more than 1 drink per day on average, you will feel sluggish and fatigued, and your mitochondria cannot function at maximum capacity. I keep forgetting I have these animations in here. Let's backtrack real quick. These are labels we want to look for not factory farmed. You want grass-fed or pasture-raised on any animal product. That's a good thing. So our little mitochondria eating processed food. That's what they look like, our mitochondria. Here's our drinks. So what is one drink? One drink is considered a 12-ounce beer that's 5% alcohol, an 8-ounce beer that's 7% alcohol, 5 ounces of wine, or an ounce and a half of a liquor. More than one of these per day, men or women, show a definite significant impact on how the mitochondria are able to use and produce ATP, energy. On the flip side of that, when we get to the sleep part of this presentation, alcohol always, for every single person that's ever been tested, significantly impacts how deeply we can sleep, so we don't feel as rested. So alcohol will never help you with energy levels other than a possible social effect when you're drinking with people at a party kind of thing, which there's something to be said there. But as far as today's topic and energy levels, alcohol does not help. What about coffee? Let's talk about everyone's favorite. Wine and coffee are like the most asked about things in my office for a lot of topics. Caffeine has a definite increase in mental alertness and can help minimize fatigue acutely. So for 30 to 90 minutes, give or take, depending on the person, you will definitely feel an increase in energy from having caffeine. That is proven across the board. There are genetic variations in response to metabolism. So some people have low responder genes to caffeine, meaning they truly do not feel an energy boost from a normal amount that a normal person, like that we consider normal, a 200 to 400 milliliter amount. You also have excessive responders. These are the people who have, a few sips of coffee and are already jittery, who feel anxious, who get gut stuff going on from the caffeine. So genetically, really, it's just about listen to your body and pay attention. If you don't feel good and energized from having caffeine, you are probably an excessive responder who shouldn't have it, despite the benefits of it. You might not get benefits, just you personally. It's the same thing as a food allergy. Sure, eggs are good for you, but if you're allergic to eggs, you shouldn't eat them. Same thing with caffeine. If you're a low responder, I would tread with caution to not continually have more and more and more and more, because high doses can be dangerous. And so if you're a low responder, we may need to look at other ways of getting that morning boost for you if you're not responding to, a cup or two of coffee. So safe levels are considered 400 milligrams per day, that should be milliliters per day. And that kind of shows you on the chart here at the bottom what kind of things have that amount. So a standard 8-ounce cup of coffee has about 200 milliliters of caffeine. I'm saying these, it should be 200 milligrams with the milliliters of liquid. I always say those backwards. So you could have 2 cups of coffee easily and be within a healthy range. If you're having an espresso, it actually has quite a bit less of caffeine. So you could have maybe 3 espressos, but now we're watching, are you adding a whole cup of milk to that espresso? Are you having, lattes from Starbucks that also have sugar in them? Black tea versus green tea. Your chocolates, people talk a lot about chocolate having caffeine, but it's very, very little. So if you're an excessive responder, you might feel a little bit of energy boost from the caffeine in chocolate, but most people don't. So these are just things to be aware of, because coffee's fine. Caffeine is fine, and it will give you an energy boost, but use it wisely. If you are someone who's getting jittery, if you're having addictive responses, like suddenly you're needing more and more, and you got to drink it all day to feel energized, that's when we want to pull back. If it's giving you a hunger stimulus, some people will respond with almost having the munchies from caffeine. That's no good. And if it's disrupting your sleep, that's another reason to pull back from it. You also want to look at your source of caffeine. A cup of coffee is very different than a sugary energy drink. So where's your caffeine coming from? Is that benefiting your mitochondrial health and your overall health? And then limiting caffeine after noon, 12 or 1 p.m. for everyone. Even if you're a low responder and you're like, I can drink coffee at 4 p.m. or at 7 p.m. and I'm fine. I go to sleep just fine. Caffeine has a 6-hour half-life, which means it takes 6 hours to get rid of just half of that amount in your system. So it doesn't matter if you don't feel like you're energized 3 hours later, you still have that caffeine in your system, and it is still sending messages in your body that you probably shouldn't be falling asleep yet. So even if you are someone who can drink coffee and then fall asleep an hour later, you are very likely not reaching optimal depths of sleep and truly feeling rested, which would be interesting if you have like a sleep tracker to track. So a general recommendation, knowing that half-life, is not to have caffeine after 12 or 1 in the afternoon, just to make sure that we sleep well, because that's obviously a huge part of feeling rested and or energized. Okay, so we know what to eat and what not to eat, or to minimize. We don't want to say eliminate. But also how we eat can be a big part of the energy feeling from food. Some of these are really basic, okay? You've probably heard a million people say these things, but they're often overlooked when I'm talking to people about how to eat well for their health and for their energy. And one is to balance your meals. So you want to make sure that your carbs are high fiber. We talked about this already, but fiber means more than 3 grams of fiber per serving. And that fiber is always matched with a fat or a protein. Our carbs are always matched with a fat or a protein. The reason for this is because carbs are always going to give you that quick energy. Remember, no matter what it is, whether it's an orange or a candy bar, it will give you quick energy because of the way that it's made, because carbs are fast energy. So if you're getting a quick energy boost and you don't have something to slow down the response like fat or protein, your body's going to say, get rid of that sugar. I don't want that in the bloodstream. And you're going to have an immediate dip and feel, again, lethargic and having cravings. So when we have carbs, it doesn't matter how healthy that carb is. If it's a bowl of blueberries, I still want you partnering it with fat or protein to slow the digestion way down. I also want you focusing on savory flavors and more protein later in the day. If you're going to have sweets and higher carbs, have those for breakfast and lunch, because as our body gets closer to sleep, our digestion system slows down and we're supposed to be feeling more tired. I want you feeling tired later in the afternoon and slowly and progressively getting more and more tired towards sleep. So if we're having sweet foods and carb bolsters, at 6 p.m., it's going to be harder to get to that point. And looking at your portions and sources of fat, because fat is such a slow digester that it takes a lot of energy. So I'm sure you've all felt that kind of itis-y feeling when we've had a really greasy, heavy fat meal. That's because it just takes so much energy for our body to break down those really big structures of fat, that's where the energy is going. You're not feeling any energy in your neurological system. So I'm going to come back to this slide. We'll talk about fasting in a second, but I wanted to just look at this concept of partnering carbs. When you're building a balanced snack, I love this little slide, is pick one from at least 2 categories. So you could have a protein and a carb, you could have a fat and a carb, or you could have a protein and a fat and ditch the carbs altogether, depending on what you are eating. But try to not have a food from only one category whenever you eat, because we want a little bit of fast carb and a little bit of slow carb, or no fast energy at all if it's like later in the day. If you're just really needing a midnight snack before you go to bed, I would rather you have some protein and fat than anything in the carb, because I don't want you having an energy spike before you go to bed. Okay. So these are some actual examples of partnered carbs: is yogurt, Greek yogurt specifically, not sweetened, with berries. Cucumber with hummus. Believe it or not, hummus has actually got quite a bit of carbohydrate in it from fiber. Guacamole and carrots, cheese and dates. So we're really slowing down the absorption of that high sugar date with the cheese. Cucumber and smoked salmon, a turkey slice with cream cheese, like in a wrap up. Fried egg with some salsa on it, natural peanut butter with sugar-free dark chocolate. These are all partnered snacks that are going to help us to feel a little boost of energy and keep that energy going, rather than energy spike and crash and energy spike and crash, which often happens. So going backward, another thing to look at of how we eat is fasting. Okay, so not all day fasting, intermittent fasting, which means overnight fasting. There are a lot of benefits that come from fasting, but when it comes to our energy production, these are some of the reasons why it works. It triggers autophagy. I'm going to talk about autophagy here in a second, but autophagy is essentially our body's cellular cleanup. It's the spring cleaning of cells. And if you're not doing that on a regular basis, we end up with those old, slow, not totally functional mitochondria, and we have problems producing energy. We have improved gut microbiomes when we have intermittent fasting. That's shown in all the research. Intermittent fasting significantly improves our glucose levels and our insulin sensitivity. And I want to note that if you're brand new to intermittent fasting, never done it before, you might feel a little tired the first couple of times you do it because your body's not used to shortening the window of time when you're eating. So know that this is sort of we're in a marathon, not a sprint sort of thing. If you're first starting off with intermittent fasting, you'll probably feel more tired than ever before for maybe 3 to 7 days, depending on how metabolically unhealthy you've gotten. But then eventually you do feel this so much more energized. It's this amazing kind of clearing of the system. You feel so much better once you've been doing it. So again, we'll come back to the mindful eating part, but let's look at fasting. Intermittent fasting means fasting overnight. It does not mean fasting for 24 hours. The maximum amount of time I want you fasting is 16 hours overnight. Okay, there's no more than that. You can also do 12 and 12. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can do 12 hours of fasting, 12 hours of eating. You could do 14 and 10. There's lots of different ways. 16-8 is kind of considered the gold standard. This does not mean you get to eat whatever you want in the eating window. This is still back to those previous slides we just went over. So we still want to be eating healthfully and paying attention to good eating patterns for our mitochondria during the 8-hour window. But by shortening the window, we have this really long period of time where our body doesn't have to spend energy digesting. It can spend energy metabolizing, taking care of all the nutrients you just ate, rather than putting all of its energy into the gut and breaking everything down. And what happens is you end up having better insulin sensitivity, better function of your cells, especially in your pancreas, better blood pressure, lower inflammation, and better appetite and better triglycerides. This is what happens when we intermittent fast continually every single night over and over again for a long time. And what's nice about it is it's fairly intuitive and it's fairly easy to do. And if you can't get 16 hours tonight, get 12. You can just keep 12 your minimum and 16 your maximum. And this is my example of autophagy. So look at that gunked up counter, right? We've thrown things there. It's kind of clogged up. This is our junk drawer or our junk counter. And eventually enough is enough, right? And we decide, oh my gosh, I don't even know what half this stuff is. That Keurig thing barely works anymore. It's only a partially functional countertop because all the things on it are all old and gunked up. So we do spring cleaning, we get rid of the stuff we don't need, we sort of reorganize and we repurpose, and we put a few things together that do work, and we fix the Keurig, and suddenly the counter functions as it should, the things on the counter function as it should. That is autophagy. That is what happens when our cells get to do cellular cleanup. And now our mitochondria are young and fresh and healthy, and they know what to do and how to give us energy versus old skunked up ones. And this can only happen when we're fasting for more than 12 hours. Okay, so we can't get into autophagy if we're not fasting for more than 12 hours or if we're not doing high intensity exercise, which I'll get to in a little bit. And back to this other slide, I just want to touch on mindful eating. We're not going to go deep into it because that's a whole other presentation. But the stress response when we eat, if we are stressed while eating and watching the news and having an argument, we will be in fight or flight. And that means that our whole digestive system will actually kind of shut down and we won't have very good digestion, which means that all these other things, the autophagy and the energy production, won't be able to happen because our digestion hasn't been completed yet. So the mindful eating, the getting rid of stress while eating is very important. Okay, so we're going to leave that true physiological energy production aside, and we're going to look at psychological fatigue, because you can be eating perfectly and you might still feel really tired. You might still feel like you have brain fog and you're just, no matter how much you sleep, you don't feel quite rested. And it may be that we're missing some of these other pieces so that we're getting ATP, our mitochondria are working fine, but we're not feeling that message of energy production and thriving. So there are a lot of things we can do here. One is in movement. There are different types of exercise and different types of movement, and they do different things with our energy levels. Zone 2 training triggers our endorphin release, which triggers the feeling of being energized. When our endorphins are releasing, we feel good, we feel happy, we feel ready to go. Zone 2 is where you should be exercising most of the time, 80% of the time. Zone 2 is the type of cardio where you feel your heart rate increasing, but you could probably still have a conversation. So this is a long power walk. This is swimming for more than 10 or 15 minutes. It's not high intensity. We're not totally out of breath. We're just moving at more than a saunter. Okay. And when we're in this zone, not only do our endorphins release, but we also start using both fat and carbs for energy the longer we go. So a 15-minute versus a 30 versus a 45-minute zone 2 exercise is going to start dipping into fat and dipping into sugar and dipping into fat, so that we're telling our metabolism to be that metabolically flexible space that I was talking about earlier. HIIT training, or high intensity interval training, this type of training is really super high intensity. We're talking sprints. So out of breath, no way you can have a conversation, gonna fall on the floor when you're done. You don't want more than 15 or 30 second intervals of these, and maybe 5 to 6 rounds of it. It's very, very short. It's very, very intense. But when we do that, we significantly enhance our blood flow. So our blood's moving around like crazy, which means we're getting all the messages and we're absorbing all the nutrients. And because we're working so hard, we tell the body to release its own stored glucose, so our own blood sugar that we've been holding on to, which gives us an immediate feeling of energy because we have sugar in our system, but also starts burning up those triglycerides. So it has all these different effects. So if you are like, man, in the afternoon, you're feeling super sluggish, can you do 2 sprints of like high knees or jumping jacks for 10 to 15 seconds? I guarantee you, you feel more energized immediately, and probably for at least a half an hour to 45 minutes after that. Resistance training, this is where we're building muscle. We are telling our body to use up the stored glucose in our muscles. So we're telling our muscles to work better and faster and more efficiently. And we're telling that muscle mitochondria, start producing energy. So it works. This is resistance training is another one of those long-term. The more you resistance train, the more energized you feel from it. And you have a feeling of being strong. So there's been a lot of research on just self-awareness, our self-image. And people over and over again report that they feel better when they do resistance training once or twice a week. And there was a big study done at a college level of all these students who were feeling really tired and lethargic because they were studying all night long. And they started putting them on a twice per week resistance training regimen. And all of them across the board reported feeling more self-confident and simply more well-being and energy by more than 25%. So there's just this psychological impact of lifting weights that makes you feel energized and good about yourself. Okay, so there's the exercise piece. There's also the mood and stress piece. So when we are feeling overwhelmed and stressed and anxious, we start to get into rumination in our minds. We've all been there, where we lay in bed and we just can't get our brain to turn off and we can't go to sleep. So that rumination leads to poor sleep, leads to feeling anxious and fatigued and moody the next day. It's a terrible cycle. So it's really important that we sort of intervene in that stressful, moody mindset, especially right before bed. We'll talk about that. But also intense emotion dysregulation. I want to point you to this bottom little slide here where it says mapping positive and negative emotions. You see how there's high intensity emotions and low intensity emotions, but then there's a positive and a negative. So I think we can all think, obviously, when we think of angry, anxious, scared, sad, bored, and tired, all being these negative emotions that drain us of energy. But I don't know that we always think about excited, elated, and ecstatic as being something that could drain us of energy. We usually think, oh, that person's happy and full of vim and vigor and full of energy. But when we're always in that space, when we're always in the excited, ecstatic, woo, like you're the party person phase, it can be really draining too. So again, you might be eating just fine, but if your job or your lifestyle puts you in a space where you have to be on all the time, you might feel significantly drained of energy. And this happens with teachers, with people who present a lot, with people who are very successful. There was a big research study done where they had all these people who were very, very successful in their careers. We're talking like millionaires. And almost all of them had lower feelings of energy and more mood swings and anxiety than people who are not in that category, because they have to be on all the time. So it's something to think about of where do you fall in this emotional spectrum, and how can you maybe get yourself into the lower intensity emotions more often, or at least dip into them throughout the day? And we will end with sleep, because obviously that is incredibly important for energy and fatigue, or energy versus fatigue. So I just want to note that insulin resistance looks the same in someone with type 2 diabetes versus someone who is sleep deprived for just 4 days. So think about that. You go 4 days with less than 6 hours of sleep, you are just as insulin resistant as someone with diagnosed type 2 diabetes. That is how incredibly impactful poor sleep is. And we're just looking at blood sugar, not all the other things. And we know that blood sugar is significantly tied to our mitochondrial health. So they're all intertwined here. It's not just the feeling of being tired, but we're truly not producing as much ATP anymore. We're not using it as well, right? If you are sleep deprived, you are not getting into autophagy. You cannot get there unless I guess you could be awake and fasting for like 24 hours and you get into autophagy that way, but that's not a healthful way to do it. There's also something called the glymphatic system, and it's literally a wash of the brain. There's this liquid called glymphatic liquid that washes and cleanses the brain area, and it only happens when we sleep because it can't do it when we're awake. That would make thinking hard. NMC is our migrating motor complex. That is literally the physical churning of the gut, and it's a sweeping of the system, kind of a cleansing of the gut that also, just like the glymph in the brain, helps clean out the gut, and also only happens during sleep. So we're not letting the body do these cleansing processes that it's supposed to do every single night if we're not sleeping well and getting to a deep sleep. So of course we're going to feel sluggish the next day because nothing's really working the way it should. It's all cluttered up like that countertop. We also don't get very much good protein restructuring if we're not sleeping. When we sleep is when our proteins kind of recreate and rebuild themselves like tiny little tinker toys all night long. And so if we're not doing that, we have weak muscles, we have weak immune systems, we have weak cells, we have weak mitochondria. And the weakness makes us feel tired. And if we're sleep deprived, and again, that's less than 6 hours of sleep, that's sleep deprivation. It's not 0, it's just less than 6 per night. We are at 30% higher risk of obesity, 45% higher risk of depression, 23% less able to focus the next day, and 15% higher risk of cardiovascular disease, which are all things that will make us feel tired because we're now fighting a condition. So let's talk about how to have good sleep. So first of all, let's look at this chart, find yourself and find what you should be getting each night and decide if you're getting that each night. And then this is what we call sleep hygiene. And it's so interesting because people often either think this is totally woo-woo, like, no, you don't need this stuff to sleep well, or they just don't think about it. They don't think about these really simple things that can truly enhance your sleep. And this just might be the missing piece. The rest of the presentation might be you're doing it all, but we're not doing this. You want to be consistent. Studies have shown that the consistency of our sleep windows is more important than actually meeting those hours. So if you're falling asleep at 10 tonight and 8 the next night and 2 o'clock in the morning the next night, it's kind of the same feeling that our body gets during jet lag. It's actually called social jet lag, when we have really inconsistent sleep and wake times, and our body just starts to get dysregulated and we can't get into a deep sleep. So you want your sleep and wake windows to be within 45 minutes of each other. So if you're kind of a 10 p.m. fall asleep person, you should always be falling asleep between 9:15 and 10:45. That's your window. You also have a magic window before you go to bed of minimizing triggers to your central nervous system. So within 2 hours of bedtime, and you should know your bedtime because you're being consistent now. So if you're a 10 o'clock bedtime around 8, you should be thinking no more food. I don't want my digestive system being triggered. No more alcohol. It's not going to let me sleep deep. Minimize blue light. So that means screens and phones, even just like our normal household lights are considered blue light. And we want to minimize triggers of stress and concentration. So don't work right before you go to bed. Maybe if there's a book that you're reading, but it's like really intense, maybe don't read that right before bed. Don't wait till right before bed to have that stressful conversation with your spouse, things like that. Find a relaxing ritual instead. Our bodies do really well with rituals. And by ritual, I just mean something that you repeat every single night. And that could literally just be you wash your face, you brush your teeth, you pull your book out. Like it doesn't have to be this whole grand elaborate thing, although it can be if you like Epsom salt baths and candlelight, it can be whatever you want, but do these things that start telling your body, I'm getting ready for bed now. Have that, and that should be red light. That should be things that make you feel calm and happy. When you do go to bed, have that room be very dark, very cool, and very quiet, or possibly with white noise. These are all things that research shows help us to reach deep sleep. And what you do during the day helps too, believe it or not, because our circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle. So when you first wake up in the morning, you should have some sort of sunlight exposure. And for my super early morning risers, if you have like a sunroof or something, if you can open that on your way to work, that is exposure. Also midday, some sort of sunlight exposure. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just make your body aware that that is daytime and you're not just stuck in an office all day. No caffeine afternoon. We talked about that. Get exercise at some point in your day so that you start burning that ATP, and get your thoughts out of your head and be productive. So do something that where at the end of the day, you feel like you did something productive, and somehow get that monkey mind cyclical repetition of negative thoughts out of your brain, whether that's journaling, whether that's talking into your phone recorder and just, blubbing it out, whatever is on your mind, talking to your spouse, things like that. And then you might want to consider a sleep tracker. If you're feeling like you're extra tired and you're doing all these things, maybe we need to see if you're sleeping deeply throughout the night. I do have this little picture of the guy on his office chair. It's just a note on naps, because some people do ask me. Some people do benefit from naps and do feel more energized by having one in the afternoon. There are some key things that studies have shown make a nap beneficial: is no more than 15 to 20 minutes and no later than 3 p.m. When we get into like 30 to 60 minute naps, we feel more sluggish because our body starts to get into deep sleep. And if it's after 3 p.m., we start messing up that window, that circadian rhythm window. So you don't have to nap, but some people do benefit from those really short power naps. So then I'll wrap us up here with some bonus hacks just to give you bonus energy. But again, don't do these until you've done the other stuff. This stuff doesn't work automatically on its own. I think a lot of people are quick to jump on the bandwagon when they see a hack, but do the other things first. So one is light exposure. Sunlight and blue light during the day and midday, we talked about that, but specifically red light after 4 p.m. There's all these different devices you can get now. There's the masks, there's the boxes like you see there. There's blankets, but you can also just get red light bulbs, and you can put a red light filter on your phone. All of that works because there's truly a receptor for red light on your mitochondria. It's crazy. Like, it's just there. And it's all over the place, but your mitochondria specifically has one, and it helps your mitochondria to know how to produce ATP, and it tells it to slow down and that it's bedtime. Hormetic stressors. If you are not in my anti-inflammatory series, I highly recommend that you join the next one and jump around in my anti-inflammatory webinars on the website, because I talk a lot about hormesis, and it's basically a tiny bit of stress, something that's just stressful enough, but not too stressful, something like cold exposure. So taking a cold shower in the morning, just for a few minutes, is something that's really uncomfortable, and so it revs up our entire system and then lets us calm down afterwards. So these can be really beneficial for producing a quick jolt of energy. A cold shower in the morning is like awesome for energy. Exercise is the same concept, as well as fasting. It's just enough stress to then produce relaxation. If you need a super quick endorphin boost, you're just like, I just need a boost of happiness and energy and joy right now, listen to music, have yourself a Spotify playlist that makes you happy and makes you want to dance. A hug with someone, physical touch creates immediate oxytocin and can be a huge stress release, which then delivers energy. Petting an animal has the same effect. So hugging those little otters down there, same exact oxytocin effect. Sunlight gives us an energy boost. There is a reason why, if you are feeling sluggish in the afternoon and you just go for a literally 5-minute walk around the block in the sun, you feel more energized. Grounding does the same thing, which means bare skin to ground. So it can be walking barefoot in the grass or putting your hands into a garden. Jumping jacks. I wasn't kidding. 10 jumping jacks, 10 squats, 30-second high knee sprint. All these things will give you immediate energy from that high intensity exercise effect. Laughter is so cool. Laughter produces serotonin and forces our lung capacity to function, which gives us an immediate feeling of energy and calm. So laughter yoga is a thing. Like, you can truly force yourself to laugh. You look like a crazy person when you do it, but if you make yourself laugh, you feel more energized. And then certain types of breath work. Breath work, there are certain ways of breathing that can calm us down, but there's also certain types of breathing that can rev us up. So breath of fire, I'm not a breath coach, but it's essentially the one where you're breathing really fast out of your nose. And don't do it too long because you'll hyperventilate. But if you do that for like 30 seconds, you feel energized from it. And there's certain supplements, and I always end here because people always ask, but again, don't start with supplements. Creatine is something that helps your mitochondria produce ATP more efficiently. So it can help you feel energized long term. It is not something that you're not going to take a dose of creatine and feel energized. This is something long term. Glutathione is the same concept. Same with N-acetylcysteine or NAC. All those first three are long term. They make your whole metabolic pathway more efficient. Same with CoQ10. The only supplement that's going to give you an immediate boost of energy is going to be caffeine. And that's something we talked about already. Be careful with supplements because they tend to be higher dose. But that may be for some of my low responders to coffee, a caffeine supplement, every once in a while when you really need it. But when you have a long day ahead of meetings, things like that can be beneficial. With that, let me pull up our questions because I did see, a bunch come in. While I'm pulling those up, we do have a virtual cooking class on the 28th. That is a typo. I was like, no way, it's the 18th. The 28th, the last Wednesday of this month at 11:30, and you can sign up for that online. All right, let me pull up. All right, is Prolon a good way to detox? For those of you unfamiliar with Prolon, it is a company that has intermittent fasting through like food provided to you. So it's actually called fasting mimicking. It's really low calorie, gets you into autophagy, essentially mimics a water fast for 5 days. It's a really cool company, really cool system. Depending on who you are, you may or may not be a good candidate for it. So definitely don't just jump on there, have a meeting with me if you're curious. But obviously, this person has done Prolon, and yes, it's an excellent way to detox because you are getting yourself into fasting mode for about 3 of those 5 days. You're in full autophagy. Roasted veggies with olive oil, is it good? Yes, definitely. I don't know energy production wise, depends on which vegetables you're choosing, but you're definitely going to hit that colorful foods, 5 cups per day, 25 grams of fiber. It's a good way to do that. And olive oil is a healthy oil to use. Is adding pea powder an alternative to protein when added to a berry kale smoothie? Yeah, absolutely. Pea powder is a good source of protein, and all brands are different. So I would read the label on the brand that you have and see how much protein per serving. And if that is your meal and per 2 scoops is 20 grams of protein, not quite 30. So we probably want to add some Greek yogurt to that, some seeds, maybe have a dose and a half of the powder, but get yourself to 30 grams total. So it depends on the brand, how much protein is there. Pea protein does tend to be lower than things like whey. Do you have a recommendation for an omega-3 supplement that is not fishy? I do not eat any fish. So the best omega-3 supplements are going to be from fish oil. That is just the way it is that DHA, EPA, those are your best sources are from fish. The vegan omega-3 supplements, they don't have as good of research on increasing those omega-3s in your system. You can find vegan, they're from seaweed. So they're from the seaweed that the fish eat. You can find those out there. They're just not as efficient as the fish oil. So I guess it depends on if you don't eat fish because you don't like the taste and you don't want a fishy tasting supplement, then get a really high quality one. Your fish oil should not taste like fish or smell like fish. So Nordic Naturals, Carlson's Labs, Thorne, these are all good reputable brands that have third-party testing, and they're processing in a way you don't taste the fish. If you don't eat fish because you just can't, you have an allergy, you can't even have the fish oil, then you'd have to get a vegan supplement and just look for a higher dose. What about adding collagen peptide? That's not exactly protein, right? Collagen is absolutely protein. It is a protein source. So collagen comes from the bone, tissue, and joints of an animal, and we have collagen in our bones, tissues, and joints. It is not a complete protein. I think that's maybe what your question is. It doesn't have all of the essential amino acids, but neither does any plant source, really. So the thing with collagen is making sure it's not the only source of protein in your day. So if you're having collagen in your morning smoothie, have lentils and chicken at lunch and have tofu or fish at dinner, things like that. But collagen is a really good source of protein. For elders with fluid retention issues and need diuretic meds, what would you recommend to stay hydrated? So it's very individual. That person would need to make sure they're working with a dietitian, because the different diuretic medications have different effects and your fluid recommendations are different based on that. So it's really hard to give an umbrella, but I will say that having electrolyte solutions helps a lot with this population, because you're more hydrated per sip if it has electrolytes put into it and you don't have to drink as much volume. Medical professions highly stressful. Yes. So we're talking about the professions, right? Yeah. If you're highly successful, if you're a teacher, doctors have crazy schedules too. So they're not always sleeping just because of their schedules. So yeah, it's knowing your career, your lifestyle. There are certain things we can and can't control. And so we have to think of all of these factors and pick the ones you absolutely do have control over. And when you feel yourself getting that heightened stress and that heightened emotion, can you dip your toe in the other side? Can you learn to recognize that you've been at this heightened state for 3 hours now? And can you find a way to get yourself out of it, even if it's for 15 minutes, so that you're not heightened all day long? Good point. All right, my friends, I made it to the end. It's 1:02. Awesome. Okay, so I will see you all on Wednesday, the 28th at 11:30 in my kitchen. We'll do some high energy snacks. That's what we'll be working on. And otherwise, you know where to find me via email if you have other questions. You're welcome. You're welcome. Have a great rest of your week. You're welcome. Oh, thank you. Yeah, happy Mother's Day to everyone else. All right. Bye, everyone.